Hey everybody, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show here on Reason and Theology, joined by Father Michael Lee, Byzantine Catholic priest, who's going to talk to us about the Byzantine Catholic Church. Father, welcome to the show. How are you?
Michael, very good to be here. Glory to Jesus Christ, as we would say. Right?
Glory to him forever. Yeah, glad to have you on. Very excited about this, and always happy to hear more priests come on the show and talk about the Eastern Catholic churches. I'm also Byzantine Catholic, so I especially want to give some priority there to Byzantine Catholic Christians out there. So yeah, Father, tell us before we dive into Eastern Catholicism and the Byzantine Catholic Church itself. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself. Are you a convert? How'd you become a priest? Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's I have a pretty crazy story, I guess. I grew up as a young person in, I don't know, the best way that I can term it is like a social Presbyterian home, Okay. So back in those days, good people went to church. We were good people, so we went to church, but that didn't really translate to a relationship with Christ or anything outside of Sunday. Somewhere along the line, somebody at the church really made my father upset. And it was like, that was it. I was probably 13 or 14. So if dad ain't going to the church, I ain't going to the church. And so that started high school age of partying and doing all that kind of stuff. Eventually, after a number of years, I ended up at college meeting a fallen away Roman Catholic woman. And we dated and ended up getting married. And I had absolutely no interest in the faith. She had fallen away, so she really didn't either. I was mad about the whole wedding thing because you Catholics are just weird. And it was this, my family couldn't receive communion. Yeah. And we're doing all this weird stuff. And, and so, and I, of course, let that be known. So everybody's like, and then that Christmas, our first Christmas married, we went back down to this little Southern Idaho Roman Catholic parish where, not a whole lot usually happens, I suppose you could say. And went to the midnight mass with the family, so because the family went with mom, with my mother-in-law, right, to make mom feel good that all the kids were at church for Christmas kind of thing. And I tagged along, and in the midst of that Christmas mass, the Lord just fell upon me. I was sitting in the middle of this little church having this, like Paul on the way to Damascus, experience of the Holy Spirit. Just a sense of, it was like warm oil just being poured over me, and this sense of God's love and acceptance and all this, which started this journey. I ended up entering the Roman Catholic Church that Easter. And just immediately, I was I'm not much of a toe tapper. So I dove in with all the fervor that I could muster, convert kind of thing, which can be good and bad. Sure. Kind of become a human toothache sometimes. People are like, I think I delayed my dad's entrance to the church probably by 5 years, just out of just my zeal.
Cage stage.
Zeal. Yeah, it was not good. It wasn't good. Anyway, and so eventually, I actually was at the time studying science. I was getting a master's degree in biochemistry. Okay. Went to Arizona State University and did a doctorate in molecular and cellular biology. And in the midst of that, felt called to full-time youth ministry. So I actually never worked in science. I left science to be a full-time youth minister. My wife and I in Southern Idaho did that for about 10 years. And God kind of miraculously called us to study theology in Austria. I'm from Idaho. There's not a Byzantine parish in Idaho.
Yeah.
Or Montana or Wyoming or Utah. Right. Yep. So there we had no idea what that was. And ended up over at the International Theological Institute in Austria. I thought maybe I was going to be a seminary professor. That's because God told us to go over there. So we loaded up, pregnant wife, 4 kids, sold everything we owned, and loaded up and went over to study theology. And that's where I met the Byzantine East. And
In Austria?
in Austria,
Okay.
the mission of this school was to bring Eastern Catholics and Western Catholics together to study the fathers. It was a kind of modeled on the classical liberal arts kind of model of the Socratic method, primary texts. We never read secondary stuff. We read primary texts. And so we had the full Roman Catholic and Eastern liturgical calendars running simultaneously. And in the midst of that, encountered the East, discovered the East, fell in love with the East, and heard a calling to the priesthood. And it was like I had no. I was, it was kind of like the call of Moses. I was like, no way, no way. And God just kept punching me through the doors, whether I wanted to or not. Ended up meeting a bishop from the United States who eventually ordained me in 2014. And so I've been a priest now for just a little over 9 years.
Wow. In the Byzantine Catholic Church. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you transferred from Latin Rite to Byzantine Catholic, but you were originally Latin Rite.
Yes. Yes. And heard, interestingly enough, the first time that I heard or really felt really intensely the call to the priesthood was probably 6 months after I came into the church. And I love to tell the story because I went to the parish priest, this Newman Center parish, kind of parish priest, great guy. And I was telling him that, he was a good friend of mine at the time. We developed a relationship. And I'm like, I really feel called to the priesthood. And he said, no, you're not. I'm like, no, you don't understand, Father. It's like, I'm just like overwhelmed with this just sense that God's calling me. And he's like, no, he's not. I'm like, no, really, Father. He's like, look, you're a married Roman Catholic. No. And so I went through life and God kept confirming this. It was weird, all these experiences. And I just kept like, Lord, what are you doing? Why are you telling me this when it's not true? And it took, so long. I mean, I'd like to tell people who don't like to wait for God's movement. I said the first time I was heard I was supposed to be a priest till my ordination was 22 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, you can wait a while.
Took a little while. Yeah.
Wandered in the desert. You know what I'm saying?
Wow, that's incredible. So tell me a little bit about the Eastern Catholic churches, broadly speaking, not necessarily the Byzantine Catholic Church, but just kind of as a whole, because, there's a lot of Catholics who they're just familiar with the Latin Rite. When they think Catholicism, that's what they think. And even non-Catholics, we have non-Catholic viewers who, when they think of Catholicism, they think of Latin Rite Catholicism because it's the largest, it's the most visible. But tell us a little bit about the Eastern Catholic churches, broadly speaking.
Yeah, forgive me if I kind of poke our Latin Catholic brothers and sisters, because I like to make the point that they aren't the only game in town.
Yeah.
Because when I came into the church, right, I was told that you go to a Catholic service anywhere in the world on Sunday, and it was going to be exactly the same as anywhere else, right? The same readings, the same prayers, and that is not true. You come to my church, you're not going to have the same readings, because we have a different lectionary, we have a different liturgical schedule, at least in the not Christmas and Easter kind of level, but right, the other just typical Sunday readings and stuff. So the best way to kind of describe is if you think about the Mediterranean Sea, the Mediterranean basin, right? The church starts in the upper room. We just celebrated Pentecost a couple of weeks ago, right in the upper room in the cenacle in Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, the church starts and becomes the center of Christianity there. And then we have missionaries that go up to Antioch. Paul goes to Antioch, starts the church there. Other places too, but Antioch becomes the center of Christianity in Greece. Then you have others go south to Alexandria, Egypt. And we think why? Well, because there's a huge contingent of Greek-speaking Jews that lived in Alexandria, right? That produced the Septuagint translation of the Old Testament in Greek, right? And then of course Peter and Paul end up in Rome. And so for the early church, these four places is kind of where Christianity settles and starts to develop apostolically, right? These are the apostles that did it. we have to wait for a couple centuries up until the time that Constantine moves the See of the Holy Roman Empire from Rome to Byzantium. That should give you a clue. To Byzantium, renames Constantinople. And there you have then these 5 patriarchates, right? You have Rome, then you have Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, and Constantinople. And really, if you take that, everything, the thumb is west, all these are Eastern churches, right? And then, of course, we have this, we give it a particular date, but it was much more fluid than that, of 1054, when the Eastern Church is separated from the Western Church. Some Eastern churches never did. They stayed in communion with Rome all through that time. It was much more, there was much more a gradient. And the problem was as much political as it was theological. Language differences, politics, a lot of things played into that. So that was kind of the first millennium. Then starting in probably around the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, different, now what we would call orthodox bishops reunited and came back into communion with the Pope of Rome. And that's us. And so the bishop, whatever territory he had, came back with him. And in that union, then that bishop and that territory became what they call a church sui juris in Latin, which is self-governing, right? So we don't, to think about it, our point of union isn't the Roman Catholic Church, it's the pontiff, it's the Pope, right? He's the visible sign of unity of the church. We have our own canon law, we have our own liturgy, our theology is our own, based in our own culture, it's kind of our approach, different emphases. We have the same results, we'd call those dogmas, right? But the way we get to them are different, the way we think about them are different. Our expressions of the faith are different. We could talk more about those differences, but that's kind of where we are. So most of the, and the Byzantine moniker, when we talk about the Eastern churches, a lot of people talk about the Eastern Rite. That's really a misnomer, because the Eastern churches are actually particular churches, right? That have the fullness of what it is to be church, who use a particular liturgical theological rite, right? So we're Byzantine Rite, but that's not our official title, right? We're actually the Metropolitan Church Sui Juris of Pittsburgh. So that's the canonical designation, is that there's this particular name of the church that uses a particular rite, right? So, for example, our church uses a Byzantine Rite. The Ukrainians use a Byzantine Rite. Most of the Eastern European churches use a Byzantine Rite. There's one Middle Eastern church, the Melkites, that use the Byzantine Rite. So we call ourselves Byzantine in our particular church out of a desire to kind of move away from the ethnic national designation, right? So that we don't limit or seem to limit people's participation, because if you aren't Ukrainian, you don't come to our church, kind of thing. Well, we don't, and where we come from is really transnational anyway, so we don't have a boundary. It's more geography that kind of makes us who we are, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So, but I know you're kind of generally answering it here, but maybe tell me specifically how the Byzantine Catholic Church in Europe was established, maybe the story behind it.
Right. So there were the prince in the Kievan Rus invited missionaries to come. He's trying to find a kind of a national religion, and Cyril and Methodius, the saints, right? Because so remember, before the schism, the saints were shared, right? The Desert Fathers and those saints, we all shared those, and they came and preached the gospel and celebrated the liturgy of John Chrysostom, which is what we still do today up there, and that converted Prince Vladimir, and then that put out, or that caused then this, because most of the time when you followed the religion of the monarchy of your place, but there the conversion and Christianization of the Slavic peoples came through that, and then another few centuries passed before there was the reunion with Rome.
Very helpful. And you're of which diocese in the Byzantine Catholic Church?
Right. So we call it an eparchy rather than
Mm-hmm.
a diocese, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm from the eparchy of Parma. So kind of since we don't have a national boundary, they call us Ruthenians, kind of out of this. It's kind of there is no such thing as a Ruthenian, really. There's the Rusin people, which we have some of those folks from that ethnic group. But then there's Slovakians, Ukrainians, Romanians, Hungarians. All are part of this, territory of Europe around the Carpathian Mountains, where our people come from, or the people from our forefathers. I'm Irish and Scottish, so
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
convert. So I'm not one of
Right.
them, so to speak.
Right.
But that's where historically our mother church, I suppose you could say, in some ways resides. And then the immigration came out of there largely about the turn of the 19th to 20th centuries.
Yeah, very good. Now, can you maybe get into some of the differences between the Byzantine Catholic Church and the Roman Rite, or Latin Rite, I should say?
I think when people, if they're not familiar with us, one of the things that's kind of helpful, because most folks are familiar with the Orthodox in some way, right? And most of the Orthodox that most people would be familiar with would be use the Byzantine Rite. So like the Russian Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, those kind of folks. If you're talking, Coptic Orthodox, like out of Egypt, that's a little bit different. But so really we are Orthodox, but in union with Rome. So our prayer, our spirituality, our liturgy, if you've seen an inside of an Orthodox church, that's largely how ours look. So I think that what we have to remember is that we come from an apostolic foundation, right? So it's not like we're an anomaly, or that we do these things kind of weird and the church tolerates us because it's some later development, but it's actually comes from the apostles. So really everything's different about the liturgy, kind of in the practicalities of it. Large divisions, you can divide into the liturgy of the word and into the liturgy of the Eucharist. Okay, we can do that, right? We have the 7 sacraments. We believe in what the Catholic Church believes. It's just our approach and emphasis often is different. So you could divide the liturgy into that. Other than that, it's almost entirely different. Some of the differences are we make the sign of the cross from the right shoulder to the left, which is actually the more ancient form of it. So I always like to tell Roman Catholics that they make the sign of the cross wrong. Because, and I tell them it came out of the fact that when the priest blesses, right, if you follow the hand of the priest and you mirror him, you go to the right shoulder first. But if you do it the Roman Catholic way, it's like you're standing beside him, doing it the motion that he makes to go to the right or the left shoulder first. So we make the sign of the cross a lot at every invocation of the Trinity, which we invoke the Trinity by name pretty constantly. Other difference is that we use leavened bread for the Eucharist. And the reason we do that is that we don't associate so strictly the Eucharist with the Passover supper. That the leaven in the bread indicates that this thing's alive, right? So it's symbolically alive. Also, the word that Jesus, when he took the bread at the Last Supper, the Greek word used there is artos, which means leavened bread. It doesn't mean unleavened bread. That's a different word in Greek. And so we also would, after we consecrate the Eucharist, we cut it up at the altar, because it's we take one loaf and cut it up, or some traditions take 5 loaves and cut them up, but we end up with what we call the lamb. And the lamb then is fractioned at the holy table, and then cut up into the Eucharist, and then placed into the chalice, and then given to people on a spoon. So everybody communes from the same lamb, the one lamb, and that is completely consumed at the end of liturgy. If there's anything left over, it's put into a chalice and then given to the people on a spoon. Readings are different, obviously. The melodies and the way we sing. The East tends to indicate mystery through sight rather than sound. Like so, like the Latin Mass, the Latin Mass. There's like periods of silence, right? That indicated that mystery, that you couldn't hear the priest. It was kind of silent, and it was indicating that there was something going on. Of course, he's facing east, we face east, not away from the people. I don't turn my back to the people. I face God, right? Perspective.
Sure.
And so, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. So we give that by sight. So that's why we have partially the icon screen shows this like interface between heaven, which is the sanctuary, and the nave, right? So it's not to keep people out as much as to indicate this boundary. But we also have doors that we open and close, and a veil that actually gets pulled across them, so that like during the consecration and the priests or the clergy communing, we actually close this curtain that you can't see. And so it's a way, again, of indicating mystery, that there's something going on there that's like otherworldly, this contact of heaven and earth, and that there's, we can't, it's something beyond us. And we do that by veiling it.
There's a couple things here. So there's also some differences with the role of infants, liturgical role of infants. Can you maybe talk about that?
Right. So this is really a difference. So we, in our approach to the sacraments, which we call holy mysteries, right? Because the word mysterion in Greek, when it was translated into Latin, was sacramentum, which then, of course, is translated into sacrament in English. So we call them holy mysteries, which is the original Greek term for them. But we emphasize the holy mysteries of initiation. And so whenever we baptize an infant, the infant receives all the mysteries of initiation. So they're baptized, they're chrismated or confirmed, same thing, but different words used. And they receive first Eucharist, and they'll receive Eucharist for the rest of their life. We don't have, culturally, we have and from our approach, we don't have that requirement that for the age of reason to receive the Eucharist like the West does. Largely, I think that's there so that the child has some idea of what they're doing, but also a sense of sin so they can go to confession before receiving. For us, we just do a solemn first confession at the age of reason, but they've been receiving the Eucharist since they've been infants. And then the chrismation or confirmation, in the West, the emphasis was to emphasize that person was a subject of this particular bishop. And so it was reserved from the bishop to do that as a sign of that. For us, I'm the ordinary minister, if you want to call it that, of confirmation or chrismation. And our connection through the bishop is the oil, the holy miron that we use, that the bishop blesses, right? So that sacramentally is much different. It could be very, if you go to the divine liturgy, it can be challenging for people that aren't used to that all of a sudden all these little babies and little kids are coming up and receiving the Eucharist. It's actually quite beautiful, because it's amazing how they long for it and they get all excited. It's amazing to see that they're, of course, we're very careful. Since we give it on a spoon, that's what allows that, right? So we can give them just the precious blood, which is, of course, all of Christ, and be very careful that nothing is spilled or no irreverence to the Eucharist. We just don't have this kind of notion that they need to have this sense, this age of reason, and know what's going on to be able to receive. Because we would say, well, who knows that much about it anyway? Eucharist is a mystery. We're receiving God himself. What do we really know other than, the gratitude we should have for the gift given?
Yeah. Now, Somebody was asking about the vernacular. Is the vernacular used in the liturgy?
Yes. And even we do, there is kind of a historical sacred language in Church Slavonic, which is a lot of where different Slavic languages ended up developing from. Kind of like what you would think that like Spanish is to Latin, right? Kind of the Romance languages came from Latin, but never was it like the academic language used by everybody like it was in the West. Latin was in the West. So there was always an idea of the vernacular used in the East, and so that's what we use. So we use English for everything. There's sometimes as a not an ethnic nod, because nobody speaks Slavonic. It's basically a dead church language, but that there's something there's a sense of the universal and a sense of something otherness by using that sacred language. So for like at Easter, we have this proclamation that we say to each other. We say, Christ is risen, and indeed he is risen. And so we like to do that in all the different languages, kind of as even a recap of Pentecost, where the apostles came out, that the Tower of Babel was recapitulated by that all men, that God divided the languages of men who are seeking to be God, and now he reunites all men in this one language of the church. And so we like to, even on Easter Sunday, we read the gospel in multiple languages as a sign of that. So everything's pretty much in vernacular, but we end up using some Greek, some Slavonic, little, but it's to keep us rooted and again having that sense of otherness and sacredness of not just using common language and elevation of language.
What personally attracted you to the Byzantine tradition?
It was, since I didn't have any experience of it outside of then when I finally went to liturgy, for the first time in Europe.
Yeah.
It was the depth, the we Byzantines sing our theology, excuse me, where oftentimes, you can sing parts of the liturgy that we sing are like the Chalcedonic formulation of the incarnation. It's almost word for word. We just sing and so the turning of those phrases, the ancientness of the hymns, the beauty of the music, the congregational singing everywhere, was all part of that. And then what finally just sealed it for me was Resurrection Matins, the morning prayer before on Easter morning. And having been to many Easter vigil masses, coming into the church on an Easter vigil, for me personally, the experience of singing those ancient hymns in words that have been prayed by monks for 1,000 years plus, in melodies that have been sung, it was the most charismatic in the sense of the church being full of the Holy Spirit, and the repeating of singing Christ is risen. I walked out of there in a way like existentially, experientially, one of the first times I've ever was like, Christ is really risen. I mean, he is risen. And it was like the liturgy. It wasn't reading that gave me that. It was the liturgy. It was like the lived experience of the making present once again, that's what liturgy does, making present of that mystery. It just overwhelmed me. I was just absolutely speechless, just blown away. And I knew at that moment I had to be that. Mm-hmm. I couldn't be a foster kid. I couldn't be a visitor. I had to get that name,
Yeah, because you can attend the Byzantine Catholic Church without actually transferring your rite. But in your case, you said, no, I want to do the whole thing. Yeah, that's what I ended up doing as well. I'm right there with you. So let me also ask about this. What role do icons play in the Byzantine Catholic tradition, or just the Byzantine tradition as a whole?
We're used to in the Roman Church that we have sacred art in the churches,
Hmm.
and quite frankly, no offense, but most churches don't have enough.
Hmm.
That right? I mean, our kind of the liturgical and especially the church architecture and whatnot after the Second Vatican Council, a lot of churches kind of took a lot of those beautiful things out. You go to Europe, you go into a Gothic cathedral, and you really have this experience that the architecture and the beauty of the art draw you into the mystery, right? The difference about the icon, though, is that it isn't just sacred art. And it isn't just something that draws you into the mystery, it's part of it.
Mm.
Because we look at icons as really painted revelation, right? They in a way, not in a substantial way, but in a, I guess maybe you could say a personal way, like we use the word window, but it really makes the content of the icon present, right? And so the icon isn't just sacred art that's there to help us worship. The icon becomes part of the worship, right? Because it makes present that one, it's like a window to that person or that event that it depicts. And so when you go into a church and the walls are covered with these icons, it's not only it's not only indicating but making present the this great cloud of witnesses that Hebrews 11 tells us of, right? The angels and the saints and the cherubim and the seraphim all singing, right? It's the participation in the heavenly wedding feast of the Lamb, where everybody's crying out, "Holy, holy, holy," you know. And so that's really where the icon comes into it. And part of the icon screen then is this, again, like I said, it's like an interface between heaven and earth, heaven and the church, that when the deacon comes before the icon screen to pray, he's praying with all of the angels and saints and the Theotokos, Mary, the Blessed Mother, to the Blessed Trinity, you know. And so iconography, like I said, isn't just simply sacred art to evoke a response, but it makes present those there. So of course we set out on what we call a tetrapod. It's like a small altar that sits out in the middle of the nave of the church, and we put an icon of the saint, the patron of the parish, or the particular feast day of that day, and we go, rather than genuflecting when we come into the church, we go and we reverence and kiss this icon, because the reverence that we give the icon passes. We don't worship the paint and the wood, but
Sure.
the reverence and the love passes from to that person that we're reverencing, whether it be the Theotokos or Christ or one of the saints. And so yeah, so it's something that is deeply evocative for us because it's real, right? It's real. It isn't just image or depiction.
Would you say that there's a similarity between the role of icons in the Byzantine tradition with, say, Eucharistic adoration that you find in the Western Church? I know it's not exactly the same, obviously, because nobody is saying that an icon is the real presence of Jesus. But would you say that there's some similarities, however, at least in the visual element?
I think there's a lot of similarities actually, and what I think that the difference would be is in the mode of the presence, right? So in one is that there's a sacramental, substantial presence of Christ in the Eucharist, right? In exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. And the icon, you wouldn't say, you know, the wood and the paint don't become Christ. So it's not substantial sacramental, but it's personal because he's present. It isn't just a picture of him, he's present there by the depiction of the icon. And so, yes, I mean, one of our kind of one of the ways we pray is to sit before icons and contemplate them and sit with them and be with them in a similar way. And I think I think we have to be, and this is my personal opinion, but I think we have to be careful, because I did a lot of, adoration of the Blessed Sacrament myself, and we have to be careful, that we recognize that where Christ is here primarily, and not apart from us. And sometimes we have to be careful that we don't think we have to go somewhere to be able to pray, or the only place that we find his presence is in the Eucharist, because his presence is in me. I'm the temple of the Holy Spirit, whereby Christ and the Father has made their home in me, as he says in John 14, right? And so because of that, even the Eucharist itself is ordered to the presence in me. That presence is to facilitate, deepen, and cause the presence in me and my transformation and transfiguration into Christ. And so I'm not criticizing that by any stretch of imagination, but I think we have to take it into the context that I don't have to go to adoration in order to pray, because Christ is in me. And what I'm afraid is people have to be careful that they don't set Christ outside of them and in front of them. They have to always keep in mind his indwelling presence, because what does the Holy Spirit do but make Christ present?
Yeah. Very helpful. Tell me, since we're talking here about prayer, are there any resources or good prayer books that you could recommend for perhaps laity to use to pray the Byzantine version of the Liturgy of the Hours? Anything that comes to mind?
Right. So, well, you touch on something I think is really important, is kind of our spirituality, our prayer spirituality as a whole. And we are, because of our development, we're very monastic. And so our prayer comes from the liturgy and really from contemplation, right? So we really aren't devotional. We don't have novenas. We don't have chaplets. We don't really do those kinds of things. Our prayers come from the liturgy, and most of even our rote prayers come from the just pieces of the liturgy, prayers that are pulled out and compiled. And then the contemplative prayers, of course, is the Jesus prayer: Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, prayed on a knotted rope called a chotki. So as far as the resources for that, I think probably I'd have two recommendations. One of them is to go to Eastern Christian Publications. They have an app, actually, but they have a website. And there, a gentleman named Jack Fiegel actually compiles the hours together into PDF format. Because, as you know, Byzantine is an adjective in our church, which means we need about 14 books to put together the liturgy, right? And so for the common person, that's almost impossible. Right. It's very Byzantine, as you say. Right. So the beauty of what Mr. Fiegel does is he compiles it for you into these PDFs of the different hours, which greatly facilitates the use of that. There's another website called the Metropolitan Cantors Institute. And that website, if you look at it up on the top, there's a little menu, and one of them says publications. And if you scroll down there, you can find daily vespers, and you can find the different hours. The difficulty with it is that they don't contain those proper removable parts that Mr. Fiegel puts together in his. If you really want a challenge, you can purchase from Mr. Fiegel this book called the Book of Hours of the Chasislav. The problem with it is that it's very dense, because it's got a lot of stuff that's been compacted into this little space. And sometimes it's difficult to navigate use-wise, just because there's so much there in such a tight bundle that it's sometimes hard to figure out what to do, right? And there's no real schema that's in the book itself that tells you what to do. That's why those texts from Eastern Christian Publications are marvelous, because he'll email you for small donation. He'll email you all of the hours and vespers every day. And so all you have to do is click on that and just do what's there. And you're doing the Byzantine daily office, right? Like the Liturgy of the Hours are equivalent.
Yeah, which, like you said, is very helpful. Otherwise, if you try to figure it out on your own, it's not going to happen.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's terrible. It's
not going to
terrible.
happen. All right. So let me also ask you, is there any advice that you might give to somebody who wants to attend the Byzantine Catholic liturgy for the first time?
One thing about my parish, St. Luke in Sugar Creek, Missouri, we get a tremendous number of visitors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's times that nearly half the congregation is visitors.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spend a lot of time broaching this subject as they're with 3 or 4 books in their hands and they have the deer in the headlights look, and they, and the first thing is don't worry, it's valid.
Mm-hmm.
It's Catholic, so it fulfills your obligation. So you aren't in a place where you shouldn't be. You're right where you should be. That's number one. If you can get the books and you can, have somebody kind of help you get navigated in the beginning, great. The best thing to do is relax. Do it when in Rome. Do what the Romans do, right? So look around, find somebody who looks like they know what they're doing, and kind of watch them. And we make the sign of the cross at every invocation of the Trinity. And if you want to make it more, you can't go wrong making the sign of the cross. You can stand there the whole time, just make the sign of the cross. And then people go, oh, gosh, look at that Byzantine guy over there, right? But what I tell people is, especially the first experience, if you get lost, which you probably will, put it down.
Mm.
Don't try to get caught up.
Mm.
Don't try to follow along if you get lost, because you're there to pray, not to follow along. And so put the darn books down, enter in, be present. Just be present to Christ, encounter Christ by being present, not in trying to fiddle through the books, because you won't know the melodies anyway. And you won't know probably what's going on unless you can sight read music. You aren't going to know it anyway. So rather than feel like you have to say every word, and that's this kind of thing that we've gotten, that people have told us that, we have to have the vernacular because you can't understand Latin. If you can't understand Latin, you can't pray. Well, that's not true, right? You can be present. And so that's kind of what I suggest is put the stuff down, pray, be with Christ, be present to the liturgy, soak in what's going around you as you're attentive and present to what the liturgy as it unfolds, and quit trying to follow.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of relaxing and being present to Christ, because we don't go to liturgy to check a box, right? We don't go to liturgy to fulfill an obligation. We don't go to liturgy to be filled up like a gas tank. We go to do what? Worship and encounter the Lord. And so that isn't just meaning following along and knowing every word that we're saying or repeating it or whatever.
That's very helpful. Are there any catechetical resources specifically that you might recommend for Eastern Catholicism?
Yeah, that's a tough question in some ways, because we are in this weird place that we aren't Orthodox and we aren't Roman Catholic. There's a lot of Orthodox sources, which many of them are good, but they kind of have that anti-Roman Catholic or anti-Catholic, anti-papal taste in their mouth, which isn't helpful. And then we have Roman Catholic sources that just are a typically different approach. We aren't scholastics. We aren't so Aristotelian and those kind of things. So it makes it difficult. One of the things you can find the PDF of this right now, it's out of print, is the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church published a catechism called Christ Our Pascha. And it really is like the Universal Catechism, but it's done in an Eastern way with an Eastern approach. And so that's a good book to have. There's a website called God With Us Online that is put together by a couple Melkite priests who are Byzantine, but they have a lot of resources and a lot of videos, more videos than texts. And the videos are fantastic, especially Father David Anderson, who's a Ukrainian Greek Catholic priest. He's the chaplain at Wyoming Catholic College. One of the foremost liturgical translators and scholars in the United States for certainly for Byzantine liturgy. Just a gem of a man, absolutely brilliant, beautiful stuff to listen to. For books, kind of in general, it's hard to find like general, this is the difference between East and West, but for more kind of spiritual works and whatnot, I just send people back to the Church Fathers, John Cassian, conferences by John Cassian, the Ladder of Divine Ascent by John Climacus, reading Basil the Great, reading Gregory the Theologian, or Gregory of Nazianzus, Gregory of Nyssa. Those are the Cappadocian fathers around that developed a lot of the Trinitarian theology. There's a really nice 4-volume catechism put out by an Orthodox priest. He's now deceased, Father Thomas Hopko. That's very nice. Another good book that's kind of a survey of the Eastern approach to God would be The Orthodox Way by Bishop Callistos Ware. It's an Orthodox book, but quite good and just kind of a synopsis, a distilled thing. And there's probably a lot more that I don't know about, to be honest with you. There's other works by other people, but those would be a good start, I think. For prayer, Metropolitan Anthony Bloom, he was a Russian Orthodox archbishop, wrote several books on prayer that are fantastic. He's now deceased. Also, Catherine Doherty. She was a Russian Orthodox woman who became a Roman Catholic and started Madonna House in Canada. It's a place of prayer and retreat in Canada. She wrote a number of books on kind of Eastern spirituality, but in Roman Catholic now context. And some of those are fantastic. Pustenia is one of the, Pustenia means desert in Russian, kind of that contemplative desert spirituality, reading the Desert Fathers. Another one to be the Philokalia, right? In Greek, it means like the lover of the good, lover of beauty, love of beauty. And it's a compilation of ancient texts compiled together as an anthology on spirituality. The only caution I'd give to people is a lot of times that language will be unfamiliar. Most of the good versions of the Philokalia have a glossary in the back that help you understand these kind of specific terms that the East uses that the West doesn't. Another famous one is the Way of the Pilgrim.
Yeah.
Right, which is the great story of the Jesus prayer that people are pretty familiar with also.
There's a great question here by Khalid. He asks, talk about fasting in the Eastern Church and any good resources on that.
I've spoken to people quite a bit. I think, in seeing, we in the East are always trying to kind of figure out where we fit, because we don't fit with the Orthodox. We don't really fit with the Roman Catholics. And what is our place? And this is again, my personal opinion, I think it is that we are like a pilot light. We're this little hot burner that is going to re-inflame and light the burner back under the West. And part of that is that we still have the ascetical life in our DNA. It's not something that's superfluous or added on. It's like the very essence of our spiritual life, right? And so we have 4 major fasting seasons out of the year, right? We're in one right now, as you well know. We're in the Apostles' Fast. So we fast from the Monday after the Sunday after Pentecost, right? Which is our All Souls Sunday, is the Sunday after Pentecost, or All Saints, after Pentecost. And we fast until the Feast of Peter and Paul on the 29th of June. Then we have the Dormition Fast in early August, the Philip's Fast, which largely corresponds to Advent. And then, of course, we call the Great Fast would be like Lent. And so we just continue to have, and we still abstain from meat on nearly every Friday of the year. And so fasting becomes this very important aspect of my contribution, I suppose you could say, my response to God's love and his invitation for me to be purified. We use this term in the East all the time. It's called synergy, right? Which comes from this two Greek terms, sun, which means like together, and ergon, work. So we work together with God. He does his part, right? But I still have a part that I have to enter into. And that is learning to turn aside my own will and calm my passions, my disordered passions, by exercising my will, denying myself good things. Food's good. Food's really good. In order to, for a better thing, right? It's kind of setting aside good things for the best thing. And so for, the more traditional kind of fasting during the Great Lent, we would be vegan essentially every day of the week and wouldn't eat until after the 6th hour or 9th hour, sorry, after Vespers, excuse me. And then and then we modify it from there. So kind of one of the differences between East and West is the West tends to propose the minimum, right? What the law is. But unfortunately, usually the minimum becomes the maximum, kind of human nature. Where we do is we propose the standard and then say, likely, right? Likely you're weak and you're going to fall away from that in some way. And so then with the advice of your spiritual father, you modify what is the standard and fall away from that to a place where, right, that's appropriate for you. And then there takes discernment. I think one of the books I recommended to you was from John Cashin, Conferences. The second conference in that book, he talks about, or he's interviewing a desert father named Abba Moses about discernment in moderation around fasting. And it's really important that we can take this approach that the most extreme fasting is the best. And that's not true, right? Because extremes can still be self-will. What we're trying to do is get rid of our self-will, not just not eat food. And so we can be just as prideful in an extreme fast as we can be gluttonous and not fasting at all, right? And so it's this learning to deny myself so that then I can deny myself elsewhere in the passions that drive my sin, right? So ultimately we're trying to get closer to God by doing his will more and calming those passions, this disordered passions of self-love that drive me into turning away from God to myself.
Wonderful response. This is kind of a funny question. How do you handle the Latin visitors that come to divine liturgy who clearly have no idea what they're doing?
Ridicule them publicly. No.
I thought that one was kind of funny.
No, that's great. No, you know what surprises me, Michael? I have to say, no, that's actually a really good question, because I get emails from people that are so worried about doing that they're going to do something wrong. Right? Can I even come? Like, will you allow me in? What clothes do I have to wear? What do I have to do? You know, I mean, and these are real concerns from folks, because I, you know, again, we don't like to be somewhere that we don't know what's going on, where we might be exposed to embarrassing ourselves, right? And I can assure you that, you know, yes, most of our communities are small, so we're going to recognize the fact that you're a visitor, right? In my parish, what that means is there's always going to be 3 or 4 people trying to help you get ready for the liturgy. And then they'll help you during the liturgy. And then afterwards, they're going to talk your ear off, give you a tour of the church, give you a bunch of materials, coffee. And you're like, I'm an introvert. Would you leave me alone? So, yeah, it's really just, I think just what I would do is invite people to take the risk to go and find out that in the end, you know, the Lord is there. And we just want you there too. And we want to share this with you. It isn't exclusionary, it's inclusionary. We want you there. And even if you never show up again, right? Because we want to share the riches of what we have with everybody. And I know people that have gone to a lot of liturgy for years that are Roman Catholic. And you say, well, do you want to become Byzantine? They're like, no, I'm Roman Catholic. My son, you know, so one of the differences between East and West, obviously I'm married, that we keep this ancient apostolic origin of married clergy, right? And it's very important to understand a priest cannot get married, but a married man can become a priest, right? It's kind of like the diaconate in the Roman church, right? If my wife would die, then I couldn't remarry. But my oldest son, who I call the heretic, by the way, he's the only one out of the family that remained Roman Catholic. You know, grew up in the Byzantine Church, and right now he is a simply professed Benedictine monk at Silverstream Priory in Ireland. All Latin, old Mass, the whole bit. And so, you know, and in talking to him, what's beautiful about it is the superior of his order named him after 2 Byzantine saints, which is really cool. His brother Theodore Maria is his name. But his experience of the Byzantine Church only helped him be a better Roman Catholic. It's not exclusive, right? And my content and connection with the Roman Church only made me a better Byzantine, because ultimately this is about Christ, not about rite. right?
Yeah.
I love the Roman Church, and I love the Byzantine Church. You guys, the Roman Church has its problems, and so do we,
Yeah.
because we're all human and we got to put up with each other.
Yeah. It's a sin element. It's everywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, amen. Right
Well,
here. Here's the sin element right here.
well, Father, can you maybe also, put in a plug for your parish and anything else you want to make the viewers aware of? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, anybody my parish boundaries are half of Missouri and all of Kansas. So if you're in the you're part of my parish already. So come on in. No, we're in. Our website is byzantinekc.com or .org.
Mhm.
Geez, yeah, here I am.
One of the two. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's org. I don't know. Yeah, it shows I'm a Luddite. Anyway, so please come if you can. Also, as you know, if anybody, we're in the midst of our parish in the last 5 years has doubled in size. Now, if you're thinking Roman Catholic parishes like, wow, they went from 2,000 families to 4,000 families. No, it's like a little daily mass doubled. We went from about 35 to 80 or 90, but we've absolutely packed our little parish and we're looking to move. And if anybody would be willing to help a little Byzantine church find their way to a new home, boy, we'd sure appreciate it. There's a donate button on our website. But that aside, the bigger thing is what we have to remember, that all of what we do, whether Western or Eastern, is about this relationship with the Blessed Trinity, right? That we've been adopted sons of God, the sons of the Father. And we now, by grace, have the relationship with the Father that the only begotten Son has by nature. That's what counts. And so, experience the East, see the beauty of what and the fruitfulness of what God has put together. And remember that unity doesn't require uniformity, and difference doesn't mean division. And so go to your Eastern church and check. You might like it, you might not like it, but at least you'll have this sense of the apostolic church in a way, and an encounter that you never have. And if you can come to St. Luke, we'd love to have you. Just appreciate the time to be able to talk about it, because so many people just don't know. They've never encountered the East. And it's just edifying to know that there's this, kind of like different orders within the Roman Catholic Church, right? You might be more attracted to the Carmelites than the Jesuits or Benedictines or Franciscans. And in a way, the East isn't just an option, but it's just another beautiful expression of our relationship with Christ and how we can approach him. So I just love for folks to check us out and to know more about it. And even if you aren't in a place, just to realize that we exist and that we really are, we're Catholic brothers and sisters in the Lord.
Yeah. I did confirm byzantinekc.org, and you can see it right
Thank
here
you.
pulled up on the screen. So yeah. And there is a donate button on it. So certainly check that out. Father, thank you so much for coming on. It was such an honor to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me, Michael. I really appreciate it. It's just been a gift.
Love to have you back on. Everybody, go and check out the website and certainly consider donating to Father Lee's parish. And that's going to do it, y'all. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We'll see you later. God bless. Hey, pro-lifers, I want to remind you about realestateforlife.org. If you want to support the pro-life movement at no cost to you in the process of buying a home or selling a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, check out realestateforlife.org for more information. God bless. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button.